Who is your favorite female character from fiction? I'll bet she has a dynamic, engaging personality. She probably has a clear goal, and she won't stop until she achieves it. Most of all, she's likable. She's the sort of person we aspire to be. She's interesting, funny, clever, and caring. My favorite is Elizabeth Bennet. Remember when she said, "There is a stubbornness about me that never can bear to be frightened at the will of others. My courage always arises at every attempt to intimidate me." I love it. Anyway, we all know a compelling female character when we see one, but why is it so hard to put that on the page when we're writing our own story? The answer is simple. Writers default to cliches. That's everyone's instinct when we're just starting out. Unfortunately, when it comes to writing about women, that often means paper dolls based on a superficial cultural trope. Male writers especially have a hard time with this, which is why so many female readers only read female writers. Fortunately, this is an easy problem to fix. I'll prove it to you with some examples. Let's take a look at 10 of the worst female character tropes and archetypes. I'll also offer you some ideas, when I can, for how we can transform them into engaging, dynamic characters with a few adjustments or with the right emphasis. Number 10. The Every Woman. Have you ever asked someone, or been asked by someone, a question like this? As a woman, how do you feel about fill in the blank? As if women telepathically share a collective consciousness and you can tap into that resource of billions by asking one woman to speak for them all? Unless you're asking a Bene Gesserit priestess, you're only getting one woman's opinion. Gender does matter sometimes, but the question implies that the chromosomes you have are the most important thing about you, and that your other qualities take a back seat. But in the scheme of things, there are few opinions that are likely to be predictable based on gender alone. The problem here is that women are often treated as a monolithic group in storytelling, usually in line with whatever prejudices the author might have. Do all women feel the same way about cornflakes? Video games? High heel shoes? Donald Trump? Religion? Abortion? No, and the women in your story shouldn't either. Give each of your female characters a unique point of view, based on their own experiences, goals, and relationships. Make sure your story includes several different women, and make sure that your story choices involve some conflict between them. What would Sense and Sensibility be if the Dashwood sisters were carbon copies of each other? Well, a shitty book is what it would be. I know this one should be a no-brainer, but how many stories can you think of where women oppose one another based on their ideological values? It's rare. If you ask me, The Handmaid's Tale is a good one. Number 9. The Doting Doormat. You know the type. She puts everyone else ahead of herself. Maybe she's a mother that spends every waking moment waiting on her family hand and foot. She's read all the 1950s manuals about how to be a good housewife. She has dinner on the table by 5. The house is spick and span, and her hair and makeup are flawless when hubby gets home. She escorts him to the easy chair, takes off his shoes for him, and kneels at his side in awe while he tells her about what a hard day he had. She must understand that his problems are so much bigger than hers, and her petty little issues around the house can wait until after he's had his scotch and cigar. She relies a lot on other people. Her daughter is her only friend. Her son's success is her only ambition. She can't cross the street without a psychiatrist in each hand. Decision? What's that? I'll ask William. He's sure to know. Look, I know that global society tends toward patriarchy, and many cultures impose the kinds of social norms on women that would lead to this type of character. That's real, and there's no reason you shouldn't write about it if you want to. But a real-life human being with no agency whatsoever simply doesn't exist. From a storytelling perspective, passive characters suck. I guarantee that your audience will immediately lose interest in your protagonist and/or your villain if they're not striving for a goal. The result is they will drop your work of art like a hot potato. If this archetype is your point of view character, she better be boiling under the surface or she's going to have to make a change fast. Think Thelma from Thelma and Louise. If this is your villain, I'm impressed. I can't imagine how a character like this could be imposing enough for anyone to take seriously. Perhaps a wicked stepmother kind of role where she's trying to inculcate her attitudes in a daughter or a female student or something, but hey, that's a goal, and your main character better fly in the face of that shit. This kind of character might be helpful in a support role, but the main character better recognize this quality in them, call them out on it, and nudge them in a positive direction. It shows her point of view character reciprocates the doting doormat's love and cares enough about her to encourage her to aspire to something more. A support character like this is also an easy target for a villain and can become an ancillary source of conflict in your story. Some good examples of how a character along these lines can be pulled off successfully include Skylar from Breaking Bad, Catelyn Stark from A Song of Ice and Fire, or even something like Patricia Heaton's character from The Middle. Number 8. The People Mechanic. Chances are she's stuck with some lame-ass man. Maybe it's her lover or her boss at work. Maybe it's a relative, whatever. He beats her to a pulp, he ridicules her mercilessly, he's unemployed, spends her money, cheats on her, molests her children, you name it. But for some unknown reason, she still sticks around. Deep down, she believes she can change him. The problem with this one is that the audience just isn't going to buy it, especially women. They'll say to themselves, what the fuck? Why would she stay with that guy or keep that job? Why doesn't she just fill in the blank? We all know that in the real world, some women really do stay in abusive relationships, long past the point when most people would throw up deuces. Reasons vary widely. Financial or physical dependency on the abuser, fear of the abuser, low self-esteem, shame, fear of being outed, a belief that abuse is a normal part of life, trying to protect the abuser, or any number of religious or cultural influences. If you want to write about this aspect of the human condition, great, more power to you. Just make sure the audience understands where your main character is coming from, and make sure that at least one of her goals involves getting out of Dodge. Whatever the complicating variable is, the thing making her stick around, better get turned upside down right away in either the inciting incident or the key event. This sort of character will most likely turn up in a support role. Percy Jackson's mom from Percy Jackson and the Olympians is an example of this. Spoiler alert, we find out that she has deliberately chosen to date some loser because certain qualities about him serve to protect Percy from the forces out to get him. I would say Marge Simpson fits into this category. Fine, she's a cartoon character, maybe she's not supposed to have any depth, and I haven't watched The Simpsons in 20 years anyway, but the moments I can recall where Marge really shines in the ongoing story is when she stands up for herself. If your villain is a character of this type, maybe something like Ray Romano's mother Marie and Everybody Loves Raymond, the main character's objective is going to be to stand up to her attempts to fix them. This could work well in a literary novel or some sort of a character study film where the relationships between these two characters grows and ends up in a positive place by the end of the story. But obviously, do whatever you want. Number 7. The Honey Badger. She spends every waking moment feeling angry and bitter. She grinds her teeth to dust, and every dish in the house has been shattered because she threw it across the room. She regrets each and every one of her decisions in life. She should have married Andy instead of Barney. She shouldn't have had children. She should have pursued the career she really wanted. She should have gone with the ship to Mars while she had the chance, etc. Again, these kinds of experiences and character traits are real, and there's no reason you shouldn't write about them, but here's the problem when it comes to storytelling. She takes no responsibility for her choices and angrily blames everyone around her. An MC like this is going to try the patience of your audience big time. It's especially egregious if she's old. Believe it or not, lots of older women are bold and confident. They've learned a lot from their life experiences. They're mature. Even if they regret some of the things in their past, most real people do and most fictional characters should, they have the wisdom to appreciate it and value something about it. To fix this, give the character some humanity. Let them care about something. Let them show something or someone some love, and most importantly, temper their angst with pain. Diana Trent from the BBC comedy Waiting for God is a good example of an older shrew-like woman with depth and a compelling character arc. Marilla Cuthbert from Anne of Green Gables is another, as well as Hagar from The Stone Angel. This archetype will be common for villains. Think Aunt Petunia from the Harry Potter series, or Mrs. Hardbroom from The Worst Witch, or Aunt Zelda from The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Of course, young characters can be like this too. Nancy Bobofit from the Percy Jackson series, for instance. The archetype of the battle ex-wife is common in sitcoms. They're usually paired with some bungling, incompetent doofus of a husband, and their constant nagging serves as comic relief. Peg Bundy, Lois from Malcolm in the Middle, Carrie from King of Queens, this list is a long one. There's nothing wrong with a female character displaying anger, learning from her experiences, or standing up for something she believes in. It just shouldn't be her only character trait. The key is to let the audience see her pain and work to make her sympathetic and multi-layered. Number 6. The Pheromone Hurricane. This woman is a roaring harpy of sexual devastation. Hot, velvety seduction exudes from every pore. Her attire, her body language, her tone of voice, sexy as fuck. Every piece of dialogue from her carries some sort of sexual innuendo. Every thought she has is preoccupied with sex. Everything she does is with the goal of manipulating someone into having sex, usually with her. Does she have a hobby? Yes, sex. Period. That's all there is. This sort of thing is common in stories, especially movies, where just about every woman portrayed is beyond average attractive, and exudes sexuality in even the most mundane of circumstances. Whole movies have been based around this archetype. Remember Sucker Punch? The main character's name is Baby Doll. She disassociates from her everyday life of being a piece of meat by daydreaming elaborate fantasies where she gets to be a piece of meat with superpowers. The audience never gets to see it, but she can dance so seductively that it casts a spell on anyone that watches. Anyway, suffice to say, there's a reason only 23% of Rotten Tomato critics gave this movie a positive review. 99 times out of 100, this type of character was created by a male writer for the sole purpose of being objectified. If you have a character like this in your story, it's time to face the truth. You're imposing your own sexual proclivities on the audience. I've got news for you. We don't care. A literary example is in Terry Goodkind's The Sword of Truth series, where there is an elite faction of women warriors called the Mort Sith. Their primary weapons are magic, pain-inducing dildos. Wands. Magic wands. By the way, I can't help but think that the term Mort Sith is a phonetic combo of Mordor from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and the Sith from Star Wars universe. Shame. Now, don't get this twisted. I'm not saying you can't or shouldn't write about sex and sexuality. Sexuality is an important dimension of life. It can be fraught with drama and conflict, and that makes it valuable to writers. But here's the key point. It needs to involve some kind of emotional experience as well, beyond basic lust. Sexuality can even be the main focus of a character's story, as long as there is a deep, emotionally driven character arc that carries the story along. I'm not talking about a hooker with a heart of gold. I'm talking about a woman who embraces her sexuality but also does something else with her life. Even if that something else still pertains to sex, she is pursuing a goal and overcoming her internal flaws. Take Netflix's Bonding, for example. She's a dominatrix. Sexuality is a huge part of the story, but the focal point of the story is on her goals and her relationships with other people. Sexuality, when it's done well, usually revolves around the relationships between the characters first and foremost. Lisa Halliday's Asymmetry is a good example, and Lolita is a classic for a reason. A species of this archetype is the female character who exists solely to serve as a love interest for a male MC. She has no personality, little or no agency, no particular goals. She's just pretty. Oftentimes it isn't clear why the MC likes her. The writer just told us he does, so we have to accept it at face value. Remember the human female from Planet of the Apes? Evidently her name is Nova, but I wonder if anyone would have known that just from watching the movie. She's the clearest example of this I can think of. She literally doesn't even talk. Imagine an alternative version of the story where she takes a more active role in the plot. She doesn't have to talk. A lot can be communicated through body language and a certain look in her eyes. I actually think her inability to talk is an interesting complication, but she needs to do a little more than tug on his arm. And if they're going to be lovers, I want to see their relationship develop. Okay, like Bright Eyes, she wants to escape. She knows the culture of the apes, she's familiar with the local geography, she can liaison between the main character and the other humans. There's no reason she shouldn't actively participate in the escape plan. Boosting her role would automatically enhance the complexity of Nova's relationship with Charlton Heston's character. I want to see more conflict, more difficult dilemmas for the antagonists, and an arc between the point where they first meet and the big kiss, so that by the time we get there, it really pays off. Number 5. The Clueless Bombshell. She has a face like Helen of Troy. She has hair from a shampoo commercial. She has the perfect nubile body of a comic book superhero. And her only personality trait is that she's stupid as fuck. Body by Fisher, brains by Mattel, nothing but echoes between the ears, room temperature IQ, somewhere there is a village missing a gorgeous idiot. To make it worse, she actually thinks she's ugly. Oh, boo-hoo. A character like this either springs from the mind of someone who believes that biophysical characteristics and outward appearances are the only things that matter about women, or the mind of someone who is deliberately trying to challenge that narrative. In either case, it's time to give the audience a little more credit. There's nothing wrong with writing about a character that's physically attractive and highlighting the multifarious ways their appearance impacts their life, but no reasonably intelligent adult with a minimal level of emotional sensitivity is going to find a story about a character like this the least bit compelling. I suppose the underlying motivation for a writer who resorts to writing about a beautiful woman who thinks she's ugly is a desire to make the character seem humble or down to earth. The implication is that a female character who acknowledges her own beauty must be a narcissist or generally an asshole. That just isn't the case, and a woman who knows this about herself and uses that knowledge in a novel way has the potential to be a very interesting character to an audience, especially given the prevalence of assumptions about beautiful women weaponizing their sexuality. A character like this would be too stupid to be a real villain, and I can't think of an example anyway, but this kind of character is oh so common as a support character, particularly for male MCs. We all know the fairy tale trope where the beautiful princess falls in love with some sort of disgusting freak. Belle and the Beast, Esmeralda and Quasimodo, Yvonne and Toxie, Tyrion Lannister and Sansa Stark. You probably love some of these characters because they're sympathetic in other ways, but they're airheads. When we're talking about point-of-view characters, that's a crying shame, and for the record, swapping the gender roles won't impress anyone, because flatline morality tales involving any character like this is going to be boring. My advice is to de-emphasize the appearance of characters altogether. In text-based storytelling media, you don't necessarily even have to describe their physical traits in precise detail. The reader will fill in elements like the character's ethnicity, height, body size, and so on for themselves. They will do it instinctively, and they will be more satisfied with their own imagination than they will be with your carefully crafted dissertation on the shape of your MC's earlobes. Number 4, the one who isn't like all the others. This gal, oh ho, she's different. She isn't fill in the blank like other girls. She isn't a girly girl, she isn't vain, she isn't catty, she isn't a gold digger, she isn't emotionally unstable, she doesn't want to have kids, whatever. The audience will roll their eyes at this sort of thing because we recognize that it's about as superficial as it gets. No matter what you fill in the blank with, there are lots and lots and lots of women who don't exhibit that quality. It just doesn't hold up as a way of differentiating your MC. A female character shouldn't exist as an exception to stereotypes about women. The same goes for any character and any dimension of human diversity. By the way, unless you're writing rigid historical fiction, readers expect gender parity. Mix in some females in leadership roles, in adversarial roles, and so on. If you were writing historical fiction, put gender inequality somewhere at the forefront of your story. In the Temeraire series, for example, which is set in England during the Napoleonic War era, spoiler alert, there is a breed of dragons that will only allow themselves to be ridden by female captains. Lawrence, the male main character, is forced to confront his own ideas about gender norms and eventually accept that women are just as competent as men when it comes to fighting on Dragonback. Meanwhile, the military brass is all male, until disease wipes many of them out and a woman becomes the admiral in charge of the whole Dragon Air Force. For a time, this is kept secret from the general public, but eventually everyone has to come to terms with it. Differentiate your women by giving them the same kinds of dynamic character traits you would give to any man, and give them interesting roles to play out. Number 3. The badass that isn't a badass. Strong female character. What a buzz phrase, but what the fuck does it actually mean? Let's start with a comparison. Whenever a male character is a badass, there's no question about it. They can hold their own in a fight, they have brilliant ideas, they're brave, daring, and fearless, they're charming, witty, clever, they have a clear goal and they pursue it. James Bond, Batman, Sherlock Holmes, Deadpool, John McClane, Aragorn, Indiana Jones, Rambo, Tony Soprano, Conan, William Wallace, Neo, Han Solo, Wolverine, Jack Sparrow, Rocky, Max Rokitansky, Daryl Dixon, Jason Bourne, Captain Kirk, Riddick, any Kevin Costner role, the list goes on forever. But what about female badasses? That's a long list too. Carmen Sandiego, Daenerys Targaryen, April O'Neil, Jane Rowland, Sarah Connor, Lara Croft, Ellen Ripley, Hermione Granger, Cersei Lannister, Michonne, Princess Leia, Arya Stark, Katniss Everdeen. Who on those lists of characters are the most interesting to you? Are there any you think are a little lame? I think so. For example, Riddick seems like a badass, so does Lara Croft. As characters, I would say they're about the same. Generally dull, a little shallow, and generally aimless. They look cool, we see them doing cool things, and we get the idea that they're going for something important, but there's something we rarely see them do. Exercising choice. Obviously, Lara Croft is a video game character, and the choice in a video game comes from the player, not the character, but the same can't be said for the Angelina Jolie movies, and that's the problem. Exercising choice is what makes a character badass, any character. Why do so many people criticize Bella from the Twilight series, or Anna from its derivative 50 Shades of Grey? Because they drift along at the mercy of other characters and circumstances out of their control. without actually doing anything of their own accord. But wait a minute, I hear you shouting at your screen. 50 Shades of Grey is a multi-million-dollar brand. How dare I criticize that? Some folks claim that one of the core reasons for the book's popularity is precisely that Anna has no control. According to psychologist Dr. Neelu Dardashti, quote, 50 Shades is alluring to women who are in this place where they feel like they are in control of everything. We have to fulfill many roles, and there's still a part of us that likes knowing our men can take charge, end quote. Draw your own conclusions. This is mine. The weakness of men, actual or perceived, in real life is no reason to write about vacuous, wishy-washy female characters. Anyhow, the way to fix a badass female character that isn't actually a badass is to put her into positions to make more and tougher choices. Force her to face a dilemma where she has to choose between two things that she desperately wants, or where she has to confront something she desperately wants to avoid. She can be at the mercy of external circumstances early in the story, especially with an inciting incident or key event, but it shouldn't stay that way throughout the story. Tie every plot point into her ultimate goal. The same holds true for any main character, whoever they are. A quick note on a different species of badass, the Pollyanna, who takes agency to the extreme of invincibility. She's a female character that is perfect and powerful, flawless, and hardly encounters an obstacle she can't overcome. Don't hesitate to give your character some flaws, and perhaps a little trauma to overcome as well. An MC should make choices, not necessarily the right choices. Your audience wants to see a character grow. Overcoming mistakes made early on, learning from challenging experiences, repairing damaged relationships, these are badass qualities. Number 2. The victim. How many female characters exist solely to prop up a male POV character? I can't put a number on it because it's too many to count. The worst cases are when a woman gets raped or killed or whatever just to ignite emotion in a male MC. This happens a lot, I'm sad to say, in George Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. Spoiler alert. My favorite character in A Song of Ice and Fire is Tyrion Lannister. One of Tyrion's core wounds is the memory of a girl he fell in love with as a teenager called Tysha. Long story short, Tyrion's father had her raped by a number of soldiers before forcing Tyrion to rape her last. He paid her a silver coin for each of the men and a coin of gold for Tyrion himself because Lannisters are worth more. This experience is one of the principal reasons Tyrion murders his father. But what about Tysha? She's an a point-of-view character, and we don't see her in the narrative, she's only portrayed in Tyrion's memories. To me, that's the problem. However impactful she was for Tyrion, Tysha herself is a throwaway character. She exists to be abused in a heinous way, and spur a male point-of-view character along his own journey. There's another point where Arya Stark overhears a character called Chiswick telling a story about the Mountain. An antagonist character we already know is an absolute piece of shit, raping an innkeeper's daughter called Laena. He even pays the innkeeper for her services and demands his change because she wasn't worth full price. Arya has an assassin kill him. In this case, the abused female character of Laena spurs action from another female character, but that doesn't change the underlying principle that she existed solely to be a victim. Some more brief examples: there's the threat of Brienne's rape that spurs Jaime to take action to save her. There's Jane Poole disguised as Arya with Ramsay Bolton. According to a Tumblr user by the name of Tafkar, there are 117 rape victims in A Song of Ice and Fire and 214 acts of rape. I don't know what all is being counted in that tally, but one thing is clear. George Martin repeatedly used rape as a means of characterization for other characters in the story, to prove that they're evil, to give them an occasion to act heroically, or to serve as a core wound for the development of their character arc. The writers of the HBO version of Game of Thrones even fell into this pattern without realizing it. There's a scene in Season 4 where Jaime rapes Cersei. She clearly says no, stop, and Jaime pushes her down saying, I don't care. Production staff later claimed that the interaction shifted into being consensual, and so it didn't qualify as rape, but I beg to differ. Also, for the record, male characters can be used badly in the same way. How much depth did Khal Drogo really have? Seems to me he was a beefcake written in to give Daenerys a traumatic experience in the same sort of way. Unless you think I'm picking on George, let me just add that there are scads of stories where this happens. In Lev Grossman's series The Magicians, there's a POV character by the name of Julia. Spoiler alert. She gets raped by a deity, and becomes a deity as a result of contact with this semen. Her character goes on to change in enormous ways as a result of this. She basically evolves past the point of ordinary humans, and goes into some sort of holy exile at the end of the story. Would you call that a good story reason for rape to occur? Well, it seems to me that the same plot point could have happened in any number of other ways, But how about the underlying point that the most important, life-changing event that ever happened to her was being the passive recipient of a male character's seat? I don't know. Look, I'm not saying you can't write about rape and murder if you genuinely have a good story reason to do so. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not you do. And you don't have to care about this at all. I'm not asking you to become a social justice warrior in your artwork. This is just an invitation to think in a different way about your story choices involving women. If you ask me, serious matters like rape and murder should never be used as cheap literary devices, if for no other reason than simply because it's so commonplace. It has become a cliché. Seriously consider whether these sorts of acts are adding any real value to the story. Strive for greater depth. Let's go back to the scenario with Tyrion and Tysha and consider an alternative. They married on a whim as teenagers, presided over by a drunk priest with only some pigs as witnesses. What if their relationship fell apart because they realized they simply weren't compatible, and they grew apart? Tyrion can still develop a number of core wounds from those circumstances, and he can still grow to hate his father for all sorts of reasons that tie directly to his character arc. I would argue that there are plenty of valid reasons for Tyrion to hate his father in the story as it's written, without the circumstances involving Tysha. All that aside, I can only think of one good example among the stories I'm familiar with of a woman character being the survivor of rape and it amounting to a meaningful story on her part. Spoiler alert, and I guess I'll throw in a trigger warning too. It's called Room by Emma Donoghue. The main character is a small boy, Jack, whose mother was abducted as a teenager and trapped in a sort of homemade prison cell. He's lived his whole life in this one room with his mother who now exists only as a sex slave for her captor. Eventually they escape, play out all the drama that ties to the situation, and things end up happily ever after. Why does this work in this case? Because the heinous acts affecting Jack's mother, who remains one of the principal characters throughout the story, is the inciting incident for everything that happened. The characters actively work until the last page to overcome the effects of the event, both tangible and intangible, and most importantly, the events that happen to Jack's mother don't serve solely to add color to Jack's story. It isn't gratuitous, it isn't a throwaway, it's a spark for the whole story. A story like Room is a rare bird. Write one like it if that enlivens you. Otherwise, use rape and murder sparingly, and only when you have excellent reasons. Number 1, the loneliest woman in the world. You've heard of the Bechdel test, right? A story should have at least 2 named female characters who talk to each other about something other than a man. Sounds easy enough. It is. But so many of the stories that we all know and love fail the Bechdel test, and one of the main reasons is because there aren't enough female characters in the story for 2 of them to bump into each other. Jaws, Star Wars, The Shining, The Princess Bride, Toy Story, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Ghostbusters, Shrek, most of the Harry Potter movies, Apocalypse Now, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Braveheart, The Godfather, scads of Disney films including Aladdin and The Lion King, none of the Lord of the Rings movies, Ratatouille, Avatar, all of them failed. Even when a movie passes the Bechdel test, it's often just barely and on a technicality. Look, women make up half of the population. Whoever they are, whatever they do, I guarantee they have something on their minds almost all of the time besides men. Make sure you reflect that in your story. This is more than just the right thing to do, this is about enhancing the quality of your storytelling. Force yourself to add more female characters to your stories, and look for ways to put them in complex, interesting scenarios with each other. Your audience will thank you. Subscribe to my channel if you like this sort of thing, and thanks for listening.